Large-scale strategy, historically realistic rules, one of the most gorgeous maps of its time, a complex but rewarding wargame that became a classic. In the distant 80s, when I was young and carefree, I spent a lot of time on board games, RPGs, and wargames. These were mainly user-friendly tactical wargames like the Cry Havoc and Siege series that we already covered in a previous video. But I also tried myself at more complex strategy games. I remember one day, I think it was in 1989, I was roaming about in a game shop. They have become exceedingly rare nowadays, but back then they were still around. I was intrigued by an unusually huge, bulky, and especially heavy box. I don't remember its exact price, but it was quite costly indeed because I recall hesitating for a long time before eventually buying it. As it later proved, I didn't regret this decision one bit. Russian Front was published by Avalon Hill in 1985. It's a two-player game that simulates the Eastern Front during World War II. The game is played on a large map of the Soviet Union and its surrounding territories. Players control either the German or Soviet forces, and their goal is to defeat their opponent by capturing key cities and other strategic objectives. Like every serious war game, Russian Front has complex, realistic rules, but in this case, they're even more complex and historically accurate than usual. The rules are efficiently structured in a booklet, and despite their complexity, the manual is not very thick, because the author managed to make them precise and concise. Nonetheless, I remember studying them for quite a long time back then. When I first discovered the game, I was not used to this kind of stuff, and it was certainly not the easiest war game to learn for a beginner. Back in 1989, as I sat there looking upon the board and its many counters, I wondered how an actual gameplay of this impressive quantity of units would look like. I had trouble finding someone among my friends who was willing to invest the necessary time to study the rules and play a game against me. The game had a too serious look with all its rebarbative charts and counters, and they thought it was not fun to play. In a sense, they were right, because this was more like a simulation than a funny, entertaining game. Yes, Russian Front is a complex game, but it's also a very rewarding one. It's a great game for players interested in the history of World War II and are looking for a challenging and strategic experience. Now, 30 years later, I'd like to try and play it again, because my actual knowledge of the Soviet-German War has increased by a factor of 1,000, and it's a topic I understand very well indeed. Russian Front efficiently recreates the largest military campaign of World War II. It covers a vast theater of operations with such gigantic forces as never seen before in history, in the war that set the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany and its Axis powers from 1941 to 1945. The game can be played using either basic or advanced rules. The basic rules allow new players to quickly begin playing the game and enter the learning curve to mastering the system. The advanced and optional rules allow more seasoned players to choose the levels of complexity and detail that they enjoy. For instance, weather conditions played a large role in the historical campaign. Unlike the basic game, where the sky is always blue, weather conditions in the advanced game can vary and affect supply and movement. In a similar way, many other basic rules can be extended by advanced ones, so as to provide extra levels of complexity and make the game more realistic. Using all the rules, including optional ones, gets you the real-life experience, with all the parameters set for maximum realism. The advanced game scenarios include the three major German offensives of the war: Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941, Operation Blau in 1942, and Operation Citadel in 1943. A game can end at the conclusion of a 6-month period or continue to the end of the campaign. There are many ways to achieve it using military but also economic factors. The 1941 Barbarossa scenario can either begin in June, as was actually the case, or in May, which is an historically plausible option since this operation was initially planned like this before new events forced the German command to postpone it. The 1942 scenario, while historically accurate, is quite imbalanced in favor of the Axis player, but it remains a great way to practice the summer 1942 campaign and the legendary Battle of Stalingrad on the Volga. The 1943 scenario is imbalanced in favor of the Soviet player and is essentially Barbarossa in reverse. This is not completely accurate because during the actual events, the Red Army had not yet grown so powerful at that time. The real Barbarossa in reverse actually took place during Operation Bagration 1 year later in 1944. The game contains a colorful 32-inch by 22-inch map board, over 500 multicolored counters, and various reference cards to manage unit deployment, reinforcements, and so on, as well as a few summary tables. The map scale is 25 miles per hex. The time scale is 1 month per turn. Counters include land, sea, and air units, divided into corps, army, fleets, and flotillas. Battles occur within a given hex and can require several hours of resolution, during which units take incremental losses. Overall playing time ranges from 2 to 18 hours, depending on the scenario and type of rules used. Some aspects of the game, such as order of battle, unit stacking, terrain effects, zones of control, and the like, are commonly found in other war games, but others are less so. The weather, the reinforcement schedule, the supply system, and the use of industrial resources such as factories and oil fields make the game outstanding and historically accurate. Even the Lend-Lease aspect is covered, where equipment and supplies were shipped to the USSR from the Western Allies. Given the scale of the map and that of the units, which don't go below Army Corps level, the game clearly stands out as a strategic simulation, not a tactical one. Apart from German, Axis units include Hungarian, Romanian, Finnish, and Italian troops, which all have their own special rules and abilities. They also have different rules of engagement and conditions for surrender, according to actual historical events that occurred in their country of origin during the war. Soviet units include standard troops as well as guards, which were a kind of elite. The game covers pretty much every element that is normally considered during large military operations. Strategic bombing, artillery, minefields, airfields, naval bases, supply routes, reserve units, you name it. All these things are not just here for show, but have very consistent rules. They seamlessly function and interact with other elements in the game. Mines can be laid on the ground as well as in the water, and specific actions are required to deal with them and to remove them. Large sections of the rules are dedicated to naval and aircraft units, which also include paratroopers. Same thing for reserve units, reinforcements, and supply systems, which are all covered in great detail. Railroads represent an especially important aspect in the game. They are essential to move reinforcements and supplies from the rear areas forward to the front. That's why these routes are important strategic objectives. And here's another example of genuine reliance on historical accuracy. Russian railroads use a different width of track than the rest of Europe, so that Soviet and Axis trains could not use each other's rail without converting the gauge first. The game takes this into account, since it's possible for both sides to convert tracks to their own standard. The special hexes you see here, for instance, represent tracks that have been converted for the German gauge. Let's compare Russian Front to another similar game called Moscow 1941, in which is set into the same historical context. This one is more standard, that is to say, less complex. The board consists of two folded maps to put together, but these are of thin plastic laminate instead of the thick and solid cardboard ones of Russian Front. They are the exact same as the ones used by Cry Havoc and Siege, which is not surprising because it's the same production label. The problem with this kind of very light maps is that they don't hold if you accidentally hit them and send their counters everywhere. The solid map in Russian Front is less subject to that. The unit counters of Moscow are better quality than the maps. They very much resemble those you have in Russian Front, except that you deal with tactical ones like divisions, brigades, and regiments instead of armies. The rules of Moscow are less detailed, but they still cover many interesting aspects. I didn't play this one yet, so I can't tell you for sure, but it does look promising as well. In conclusion, we can say that Russian Front is one of the most accurate and detailed simulations of the Soviet-German war at a strategic level, which takes into account a wide range of factors and achieves a realistic and immersive experience. It's a highly strategic game where players must carefully consider their every move, as even a small mistake can lead to defeat. The game rewards careful planning and meticulous operations. There are many different ways to win, and the outcome is often uncertain, so that you can play it again and again without fear of repetition. It's a complex game, difficult to learn, and a very long one too, several hours at least. It's also an old game, and its components are not as shiny as some of the newer ones. But it's a great game for players interested in the history of World War II, who are looking for a truly realistic war game experience.